Hey everybody, this is Mr. Maupin coming at you with an AP government video. This is our very first video in the course focusing in on topic 1.1, Ideals of Democracy. Now, when we talk about the creation of the American government, we have to understand that the American government did not just spontaneously, get created from nothing. In fact, the American government that we have today is really the result of an evolution of theory regarding government. Now, the values that go into what's going to become the U.S. Constitution, and even the notion that we had the right to have our own independent government, is going to be the result of what is going to be, at the time, modern thinking about government. If you go back, traditionally, pre-Renaissance, if you will, the general attitude was that, government existed in the form almost always of a king, and that was what God wanted. That, this was, what was divine. Kings would use this rationale to justify the rule, the divine right of kings. And the general attitude was that, you didn't question government, you didn't question the structure of it, you didn't question, whether or not you had a voice or a role in it, because if you did, it was assumed to be that if you questioned government, then you were questioning God. And if you questioned God, then you are going to be on the wrong end of that argument. But as we get into the Renaissance era and a little bit beyond that, attitudes are going to start to change, and the simple answer that this is what God wants is not going to be enough to explain, why government exists, what its role is supposed to be, and where do the people fit in that. And what is going to be spurring this, change, this awakening, this enlightenment, is going to be taking place as a result of the scientific revolution. As we get into the scientific revolution of the 16th and 17th centuries, people began to basically demand, or at least thinkers, be it scientists or whatever, that you had to have reason. You had to have a logical explanation as to why things exist. You know what I mean? If you were asking the question of why is the sky blue, to say that it was blue simply because God wanted it that way was not enough anymore. We're looking for scientific explanations beyond that. And once again, that's going to rely on logic and reason. And so if we are using these principles and these values regarding science, the physical world, well, you're going to start to see philosophers, political thinkers apply it to political matters. And long story short, this is going to lead to the idea that there are what we call natural laws. That there are things that exist by definition because humans exist in society. And as part of that general overall concept is the notion that we as human beings are entitled to what we call rights. Things that we all get to enjoy simply because we exist as human beings, regardless of status, regardless of wealth, regardless of faith, and that gets extrapolated into more modern terms in terms of, gender and race and ethnicity, that the basic thing is that there are certain things that we are entitled to simply because we are human beings. Now, note, what do these rights include? How far does it go? Where do these rights come from, et cetera, et cetera. Well, we're going to start to see some important Enlightenment era thinkers start to come up with some of those answers. And one of the early influential thinkers in the Enlightenment is going to be an English gentleman by the name of Thomas Hobbes. Now, to give you a little context, and I think this is pretty critical context, Thomas Hobbes is going to be writing in the mid-1600s, during a period known as the English Civil War. And not that you need to know a whole bunch of details about the English Civil War, other than the fact that the two sides, be it the Puritan Roundhead side or the Royalist Cavalier side, it's going to be a bloody, brutal war that will be taking an extended amount of time to fight. So, what Hobbes is going to be seeing and experiencing vis-a-vis government is going to have an impact in terms of what he thinks government should be, where it comes from, what its role is, etc. And think about it. If you're living in a time of what seems to be political chaos with blood and death and destruction and human beings, being savage towards one another, well, that's going to help to explain, why, if you're Hobbes, that you believe in your work called Leviathan, that, human beings are born with unlimited rights. In other words, the ability to do anything. In the state of nature, as Hobbes described it, we as human beings are endowed with absolute rights. We have the ability to do anything, say what we want, travel where we want, pray how we want. We can do anything. That is what we are endowed with as humans in the state of nature. In other words, in the natural state of things, as things are in its origin. But understand that in a world of unlimited rights, there's a catch to this. Yes, in the state of nature, some of you might be thinking, oh, hey, I would love to live in the state of nature. I got the ability to say what I want, go where I want, pray how I want, do whatever I want, But it also includes other things. It also includes the right to steal. It includes the right to assault. It includes the right to even kill. And so what Hobbes is basically saying is that we as human beings in our natural state, as we naturally exist, are endowed with the right to do anything. Anything. There is no real moral value to it. It just exists. And we as human beings in our natural state, according to Hobbes, will be willing, since we don't place any moral value on these things, we'll do any and all of these things. Not only will we say what we want, we will take what we want. And we won't care about the ramifications. We won't care about somebody else's feelings. We're just going to do it. Why? Because we can. And that would kind of be explained once again in where Hobbes is coming from. Hobbes is living in a time where people are engaging in the most brutal, horrific acts that you can imagine. They are stealing. They are assaulting one another. They are killing one another en masse. So what Hobbes is kind of describing is that we as human beings are, pretty despicable creatures. And if we live in the state of nature, if we just live in the form that we are, originally existing in, life will become, as he describes it, nasty, brutish, in short. In other words, Hobbes believes that we as human beings, as were originally created, since we apply no moral values to what we do, we are willing to engage in the most horrific acts that you can think of. Why? Just to exist, just to gain more power, just because we can, we want to, whatever. So understand that in the state of nature, this would be an anarchist kind of state. Now, I don't want to apply like modern anarchist values to this. So I'm not talking about from the last 100+ years or so ago, but I'm just talking about a state where there is no government that exists. So in other words, if we live without government, which is kind of how we're born without government, then we will just rip each other to pieces. We'll destroy each other. We will kill each other. It'll be a pretty horrific place to live in, as we normally just exist by definition. And if that's the case, then in other words, if, human beings are these little psychopaths that are running around willing to engage in horrific acts towards one another, what then has to exist to protect us from one another? What would have to exist to kind of intervene to make sure that we don't just murder each other? Well, that entity is called government. According to Hobbes, government exists basically to protect us from ourselves. And government has to be strong. It has to be assertive. And it has to be imposed. That, in other words, according to Hobbes, government doesn't come from the people. And it kind of makes sense because, as you can imagine, Hobbes doesn't really have a pretty high, doesn't have really a high regard for people. So government doesn't come from people per se. So in other words, it doesn't come organically. It doesn't come with the consent of the governed, if you will. But it's imposed. It's imposed from high up. And it is done to instill order. That you have to have a strong government. As you can see here kind of depicted with the sword, with authority. And that government has to come in with its power and authority to take control of the people. As you can kind of see here in this depiction here, that you have to have strong government to keep the people in line. Because if you don't have strong government to do that, society will unravel. It will look, something akin to like The Walking Dead. You know what I mean? Or The Purge, whatever dystopian movie or show you want to think of. That is what's going to happen if you do not have government. So understand that from an early Enlightenment perspective, like Thomas Hobbes, government exists because it has to. It has to because it has to protect people and protect people from one another. So in other words, people need government. That is important, that it is essential. So understand that important origin. Now note, the story doesn't end there. It's a starting point. Because if it ended right there, then that would justify all sorts of dictatorial, authoritarian regimes, etc. Even though some could conceivably be benevolent in nature, it justifies a sense of government from upon high instilling its power upon the people, regardless of what the people want. Next time, we're going to take a look at the next kind of evolution in that theory. A man that will also believe, like Hobbes, in natural rights, but is going to have a very different view towards, human beings. Unlike Hobbes, who kind of believes that human beings are pretty evil by definition, we're going to talk about another man named John Locke that's going to have a more positive view regarding humans and human nature, and it's going to come with a even more rational justification for government. But we'll do that next time. We'll see you then. Bye-bye.